Hey you, welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Sequel Q&A video edition. My name's Doug. This week's interview is with the premier person in Hollywood for a particular role. This is the Hollywood bug guy, the go-to guy that everyone went to in the 80s and 90s, whether it be for the actual work or was for consulting. And that is my new friend, Steven Kutcher. Steven found us by going on YouTube. He was watching Teen Wolf 2. He saw the scene that he worked on when they're passing around the fleas to put on Jason Bateman in school. And while he was watching that scene, he like wanted to watch it again. Goes on YouTube, searches Teen Wolf 2. Somehow our review comes up. He watches the whole thing. And then he emails us because we discussed in that scene, where do you buy it, in a comedic way because we're funny guys. And he reached out to me and then I said, hey, I'd love to interview you. And also Brian Thompson told a funny story about working with Steven in Fright Night Part 2. And he said he was the bug guy and he drove a bug. And spoiler, that is Steven. He drove a Volkswagen Bug. He has so many great stories in the interview, which is unedited. There's be sometimes that I hem and haw. One time he goes away to look for some cool memorabilia. It's worth it. When he comes back, he has some really cool memorabilia from movies he worked on. And he has a whole wall of insects behind him. And we do have our first spider on the podcast. Man, he's worked on Exorcist II, Arachnophobia, Jurassic Park, Prince of Darkness. Like really, ton of movies, ton of great stories. And he kind of fell into this by accident. A professor said, hey, you want to go do this thing for Exorcist 2? And he said yes. And it's a wealth of knowledge, great stories, one of the nicest guys I ever talked to. So do me a favor before I start this video interview, boom, hit subscribe. So next week you can watch, or if you want to listen to our reviews, go to sequelsonly.com. You can subscribe there. And there, next week, we're going to have Exorcist 2 review. Linda Blair is back, baby. And I can't wait to discuss it. But right now, it's all about Hollywood's bug guy. He's the best. Steven Kutcher. Enjoy. Subscribe. But to answer your question, before we started recording, like, why did we choose Teen Wolf 2?
Yes.
So the format of this podcast, and because there's a lot of podcasts, obviously, I'm sure you know. And we love movie review podcasts. This one in particular, How Did This Get Made? And we wanted to do one, but I wanted it to be super unique in the sense of, not like we're saying anything different than other people do. I think we have a unique flair to like our banter, but I personally interview somebody that's worked on every sequel that we review. So for Teen Wolf 2, I interviewed Stuart Fratkin, who played Styles in the sequel. So that's why we covered that movie.
I see. I see. I have a few props I can share with too that I brought in.
Cool. Yeah, show that. And then I want to talk about like the beginnings. But yeah, what props do you have? I'm excited.
Well, do you want me to, are you going to do an intro to who?
Yes, I do that all beforehand. So like, not now, but I do what before I put the interview out. I do like a whole little beginning
right.
like soliloquy thing about who you are, your background. Right. Yeah.
So these are Men in Black glasses. I consulted in the beginning. They did a cockroach scene in New York, and they got somebody locally rather than flying me out. But Barry Sonnenfeld gave everybody an autographed copy of the script, which I have.
That's awesome.
And they gave everybody these funky glasses. And then I have, these are rubber grasshoppers from The Exorcist II that, let's see, hold them up.
I see him. That's awesome. Is that your first movie that you ever worked on?
Yes. That's The Exorcist II. And then this is really cool. I think it's really cool because it's a box that has the original spider that we used as a model for Spiderman, and the little platform that we used to spray the spiders.
Yeah.
So this was the original little model we use. And this is one of the rubber spiders from Arachnophobia, the models that they use. So besides live spiders, they had they made up a whole bunch of these rubber ones. And these little spiders over here were like stand-in when we were practicing the webbing down.
Oh
So
my God.
those are some of the things.
I love that. So when I talk to back and their buddies, and they actually met on that movie, Stuart Penkin, who plays the cop, and Peter Jason, that was the first time they ever worked together. And from that, they formed a lifelong friendship to this day. But Penkin was telling me how everyone had to get like used to the spiders because they were very expensive.
Yes, they were shipped in from New Zealand. And one of my jobs in working with over 100 feature films and so many other projects is to work with the actors, because they need to know what the spiders can do and can't do, which has given me great opportunities to work with the director and the top actors. And one of the early, in the 1980s, I believe, one of the early movies, I actually was hired to work on Tarantula's Deadly Cargo, which was a TV. Tarantulas in coffee, the plane crashes, the tarantulas get out. And they hired me to work with the actress so that she wasn't too afraid of the spiders, because they had a scene, so I didn't have to do any bug wrangling. All I had to do was work with the actress. Well, I'm a teacher and I have a lot of experience, and I try to help people overcome their fears. So that was really perfect for me. But I did see something that was quite frightening on that movie. And the actress was supposedly necking with the male counterpart and on a blanket on a hill. And then she feels something and she goes, "Oh, I'm being tickled by him." And then she goes, "Ouch," and she gets bitten and she rolls down the hill. Well, usually they would have a stunt person do the rolling down the hill, but they had her do it. And she rolled off to the side, and you could hear her head hit the tree. It was that loud. It was frightening. So sometimes those things happen. They should have had a stunt person.
Of course, yeah.
And I'll tell you another thing that happened on another scary thing that happened on The Exorcist II. There's a scene when the house is going to collapse, and they put a stunt person in the bed on the second story, and the bed was supposed to slide, and they had a restraining wire so it would stop. And this is where what's her name? Who played the
Linda Blair?
Linda Blair. Yeah, I put grasshoppers on her face. So the bed, she's supposed to be in the bed. This is a long wide shot. The bed is sliding, the house is collapsing, and the wire broke. This is in the middle of shooting, and the bed goes off the second story and crashes down. And everybody, even though there was a lot of noise and things going on, there was this silence. Because,
oh my God.
So those things happen every once in a while, but the person was okay.
That's good.
Because the spring of the bed, they landed in.
Well, Stephen, I'm sure you have so many stories, but like I mentioned when we chatted a little bit earlier, like I love hearing how people started. So did you grow up in Manhattan?
I was born in Manhattan, New York.
Nice.
Lived in the Bronx for the first 5 years of my life. And you'd wonder, what is the nature connection there? Because even though my parents took me to the Bronx Zoo. And,
love that place. Yeah.
Yes. And things like that. Every summer we spent the summer in the Catskill Mountains.
Nice.
And in the Catskill Mountains, there are wild strawberries, wild blueberries, fireflies, snakes, fish. And my grandmother would cook. She was an amazing person. So she would go out and pick wild strawberries and blueberries. So I had all those adventures every summer for the first 5 summers of my life.
Wow.
And one of the turn-ons for me was collecting fireflies, putting them in a jar, and that just lit something. So that as a young child, when we moved to California, I knew I wanted to do something with insects. In fact, I always kept insects in my room. So people have lots of stories. Some people wouldn't go in my room, my bedroom. You know, Stevie has bugs in his room. So everybody knew that. So ever since a small child, and then when I became old enough to understand what an entomologist was, I wanted a job where I'd be indoors and outdoors. It was the perfect job, an entomologist. You get to work in the laboratory, be a scientist, and you get to go out and collect insects.
Wow. So how does Exorcist II happen? Like, how does that, did you have that any inkling ever? Like, I'm going to do this on a movie set?
No, I had a background in comedy, and on
Really?
yes, in KUSC, I heard these two guys, Stein and Isles, on the radio, who went on to win Emmys and write for a lot of TV shows. But in those days, in the early 70s, we actually had what's his first name? Who Shearer. Harry Shearer. We actually had Harry Shearer on our show, and he was part of our show. And it was a comedy talk show, and I worked out a segment. I just came in. They were supposed to have a prostitute who was supposed to come in, and she never showed up. I had never seen a prostitute before, so I showed up, and they said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I'm an entomologist." And they said, "Oh, you talk to bugs?" I said, "No, I'm an entomologist. I study them." And from that time, I went home and I created this little segment where I would play bug songs, number one on the Bug Boss 40, like Fly Me to the Moon or something like that. And I did the bug weather report. I'd read from the scientific reports of what's happening with insects around the nation. I'd say there are army worms at this, in Clark County, and then they'd make fun. Their job was, I was the straight man. I would just the news, and then I would do some other things and answer bug questions. It was a lot of fun. And when I was working on my master's degree at Long Beach State, my major professor knew I did that kind of thing.
Okay.
I did stuff outside science. And he got contacted by one of his former students who said, they're shipping in 10,000 African locusts for this movie, and they need somebody to take care of it. So he thought of me. He said, you could take care of 10,000 African locusts, because he knew I could do that kind of thing. And it turned out it was only 3,000, but still a lot of grasshoppers. And they built these big cages, and we had 80 flats of ryegrass. So every day I have to go in the cage with these flats of ryegrass, and they'd mow it down. People would look at me, and then it was so much fun. I worked on it for 6 months. And
wow.
I got to work with James Earl Jones and Richard Burton and Linda Blair. It was just, I was awestruck, because I'd watch them on TV, and there I am removing grasshoppers from Richard Burton's crotch. So it was, and at that time, this is another short story, I was a fan of, I really didn't know who Clint Eastwood was. It was in the early days. It was 76, 77. But he was on the set. So all these people would come on the set, and famous people would come on the set because we had these African scenes. Well, I was in a position where I saw Cyndi Lauper, and my choice of Cyndi Lauper or Clint Eastwood, I could go up and talk to him because I'm part of the crew, and they're there. And I went back and forth. I wanted to talk to them both. but I ended up having a nice little conversation with Cyndi Lauper.
Nice.
And later on, I had 2 misses with Clint Eastwood. I can't remember the first one, but the second one was Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. I did a demonstration of flies flying around my face, and Clint Eastwood said, see if we can get that guy to come over and play the part. They were filming in Florida, I believe. And I turned it down. And the reason I turned it down was I had a chance to make a lot of money in New York working on a TV show Now and Again. And it was the only time I really made the second time I only made big Hollywood money.
Wow.
So I said, do I go for the money or do I go for the, getting this part? And I decided to go for the money.
Yeah, that's smart. Man, I love that movie. There's probably so many movies that you worked on that aren't on your IMDb. Like one of the ones that I found that, like I looked at a Wikipedia page, which again, they're not 100% accurate, but one on there that really caught my eye was, did you work on Nightmare on Elm Street?
Yes, I think it was number 3.
The third one, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I flew some dragonflies. I had to color some dragonflies and flew some dragonflies for that.
Great.
But that, that brings up an interesting point. People think when the credits run, everybody's in the credits. Lots of people are not in the credits, and sometimes famous people. So that's why my IMDb is very sparse, but I've worked on over 100 feature films plus numerous other projects.
So to go on to piggyback that, so after Exorcist II, you're there for 6 months. Cyndi Lauper. How quick after that does you doing that get you another job like right away?
Right. Tony Curtis was there one day.
Oh man,
it's kind of amazing.
That's so cool that movie, because sequels weren't a thing back then. Really, it was like very rare that a movie would be a sequel. And yeah, that's pretty cool that all these people are just hanging out.
And that movie was really panned. A lot of people panned it, but I say the grasshoppers look good. The grasshoppers that I did look good.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, that's the end of that adventure. And then the assistant director, his next job was working with Linda Carter on Wonder Woman, the TV show, and the bad guys were going to sabotage a plant with lots of ants, and they needed somebody to get ants. So of course he knew who I was. He called me up and told me about it, and I went out and got some ants. That was a big job because the scene was the name of the show is Formicida, which is actually the scientific name for ants, and the scene is this envelope gets delivered on the desk and then thousands of ants pour out. Well, anybody could put the envelope down, but not everybody could figure out how to make the ants come out. And then the other big problem is, how do you collect them?
Yeah.
And that's what happens over and over again. I mean, when I work with cockroaches, I'm controlling the cockroaches so they're not running all over the place and underneath the refrigerator. People don't realize that. It's a big job. Even if you're working with one cockroach on a kitchen set, if that cockroach gets, down in the drawers or something, you're spending production time trying to retrieve the cockroach. You don't want to do that. So I'm pretty good at corralling and making sure that doesn't happen.
So how do you do that? So for like the Wonder Woman one, they say, hey, this is what we need done. You talk to the director and they say, this is what the scene's going to look like. Do you practice that, or did you already have a plan for it, or is each time a different scenario for you?
So my advantage over dog and cat trainers who will also do bug stuff is that I'm a trained entomologist and I learned how to do techniques. I learned how to put insects to sleep with carbon dioxide. I learned what to put on walls to prevent insects from coming up so you can't see them. In that case, I had a barrier around on the floor. And we had developed, my friend and I had developed vacuum cleaners. Well, one we called the Anteater, that was a modified vacuum cleaner so we can suck up the ants without hurting them. Because you have American Humane there and stuff like that. So we could suck up the ants, wouldn't hurt the ants, and we could do a second shot. In the case of cockroaches on a table, where I've had to do, I'll run copper ribbons around the base of it and a base of the table, just underneath the table where you don't see it. So the cockroach starts to crawl underneath the table, gets shocked, and comes back.
Ah,
so
that's amazing.
So I know, and I have pages of things I know how to do with different insects so that they don't fly away. They do things like that.
Did you work on Joe's apartment?
No, Ray Mendez did that.
Oh, okay.
I get asked about that, and I also get asked about Indiana Jones. I didn't do that one either.
Is there before we talk about like other movies and stuff, is there like a favorite one to work with? Is there like a particular insect that's easiest for you to handle?
Well, I love all insects.
I'm sure.
It's really a lot of figuring out. Now they do it with CGI, and that's why I don't work so much. But it's figuring out what you're going to do with a shot. Now, a lot of times, I can only figure out so much because with insects, it really depends on lighting. And I don't know how it's going to be lit. So one thing, if I'm working with butterflies, for example, I have to tell them, you need to put screens in front of the lights because the butterflies will fly to the lights. And if the screens are not there, they'll fly right into the lights and incinerate, just like that. So it's really having a lot of that knowledge. And it's the behind the scenes consulting. It isn't just working with the bug. So I have to figure out, are there any cracks or crevices? Are there openings to outdoor light? You know, if I was shooting outdoors or indoors, what is the temperature? What is the wind condition? There are all these things. So one of my little things I learned to do, rather than carrying a thermometer, I look at the crew. If the crew is in t-shirts, that's good. That's good for filming. If they're calling me in at 7 o'clock in the morning and everybody's bundled up in jackets, then that's not so good for flying butterflies. But I have workarounds. So I had in, let's see, it was a movie with Bette Midler where she plays a witch. It's called
Hocus Pocus?
Hocus Pocus. I worked on Hocus Pocus, and I did 2 shots in there. One with the mummy
Billy, Doug Jones.
When Billy comes out of the graveyard, his mouth is stitched up and he cuts it, and then he coughs and moths fly out.
Oh, that's awesome.
So what we did was we put an insert in his mouth. The bottom level was Fuller's Earth. That's the dust you see coming out. The top level, I stacked cabbage butterflies, one on top of another at the top part. And then I told him to set up the lights so it was lighted equally. So it wasn't, the lights weren't on one side or the other, brightest lights. It was all equal. Because I knew and I did the demonstration of butterfly flying out of my mouth so they could see how it would work.
Yeah.
That I knew when they flew out, and they shot it at night. So I knew that they would be confused with all the lights. So they wouldn't just go out, fly off in one direction. They would be confused and fly around in front. So you'll get a little more screen time. So that's how we did that shot.
Oh man, that's great. So did you have that same moment after doing Wonder Woman? like after that, did you think like, okay, well, those 2 times were fun, or did
Yeah,
it just? That's what it did. Yeah.
I said, that's it. And then what happened is my name got out there and I started doing some commercials. I did some great commercials for Hewlett Packard. Touchscreen computers in the 1980s, they never took off. So touchscreen never took off, but I did these early ones, the caterpillar crawling across the keyboard. I did a butterfly flying across the logo, stuff like that. But then I did something. I did something that most people wouldn't do, and that's what makes me different, I guess. I watched movies. Well, everybody watches movies. Well, a lot of people. But I kept a journal and I counted how many movies had insects in them or an insect related thing. And I discovered that 1 out of every 3 movies had an insect or an insect related thing in it. Because most people aren't going to pay attention to a fly on somebody's cheek or a cockroach running across. They'll just go, okay, that was there. They might think somebody did that or not do that, which sometimes happens. But once I discovered that 1 out of 3, because I was heading to get a PhD, I said, well, now what am I going to do? Because I had put so much time into school, I said, well, if I work in Hollywood, I can make money that I couldn't make as an environmentalist or a teacher, but it would give me the opportunity, it would pay for my environmental habits and I could teach. To show you the difference, I could work on a 4-day commercial, 3 days of prep, 1 day of shoot, and I'd make as much money as I did teaching all year long my one class.
Especially back then, commercials paid really good back then.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
And I even had a couple of directors saying, you're making a lot more money than I am. But let me tell you, if you're shooting a commercial and you need flies and it's wintertime and there's snow on the ground, where are you going to get them? So it's somebody like me. And in fact, I used to get this call maybe 4 or 5 times a year. It's wintertime. There's snow on the ground on the East Coast, and they want to shoot a springtime commercial with fireflies. So now everything's done CGI. But when I realized that, I was working on a commercial and the hand model, because they had a guy for his hands. Sometimes if there's a hamburger on a plate and you have a big hand, it makes the hamburger look small.
Yeah.
You have somebody with a little hand come in. And he said, why don't you put yourself in 411? It's a free listing. So I put myself in as, I didn't say I only, but I put in as insects and spiders, arachnids. I do things like that. And I started getting calls. And then in 1990, I did Arachnophobia and the world changed. I don't know, it was Frank Marshall or Steven Spielberg, but they said, we're going to make you famous. Probably Frank Marshall. And from the 1990s, after I did Arachnophobia, because my name was on the credits, a lot of people knew who I was, and I did this amazing thing. I mean, that movie was really, yes, they had good acting in it, but that was really my movie. Yeah. They don't talk about it that much, but all those spider scenes, except for the tarantula scenes that Jules Sylvester did, I had to figure out how to do it. And it was a whole other level than most movies have. So that was probably, then I started doing all kinds of other movies. It was just one right after another. And not only movies, commercials, music videos. So I did a lot.
So that was like your turning point, like that movie, because even from that, did you do any late night shows, or is it just being on like Larry Sanders as like a?
Well, I did the Tonight Show. When I did Arachnophobia, they put me on all kinds of interviews all over the United States.
Oh, nice.
I was in Tampa, Florida, in a hotel room, and I did 19 radio interviews from, from that room.
No, but Larry Sanders, I think, is I love that show. I'm a huge love Gary Shandling. And that one that you were on, they won an Emmy for that episode.
Yeah, well, I think it was nominated for an Emmy. I don't know.
Nominated. Yeah.
But I'll tell you how I got that job. And this happens in these, in these movies. So they were going to get Joan Embry. The scene was they had a container of spiders. Gary Shandling gets startled and throws the whole container up in the air. And I said, you can't do that. And I said, you don't need, just came out. I said, you don't need Joan Embry. You need me. And so they hired me both as a consultant and an actor on the show. It just was mind-blowing for me, because here I am working with Carol Burnett and Gary Shandling, and other people were on the set. I was just blown away. In fact, behind the scenes, when they're all taking pictures, which I could have been part of, I was just aghast at the whole thing.
I bet.
But I told them how to do it, and everyone was professional. And the little scene I have with, who played his sidekick?
With Jeffrey Tambor. Hank.
Jeffrey Tambor.
Yeah.
He ran lines with me. He was such a nice man. We did that take in one take.
Nice.
And I was so nervous. I said, how do people remember all this stuff? I had lines. It went, and I was so pleased with that. And that was the show that really kicked off their series.
Oh yeah, that was the third episode of the first season. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So Arachnophobia was a big turning point, and then from there, you're probably getting so many different types of movies, because that's when movie making. Obviously, the 80s was like the VHS boom, because they needed to fill up video stores, so a lot of movies were made. But just looking at the movies that you worked on, like The Vanishing is kind of like a different movie, but like working on Jurassic Park.
Yes, The Vanishing was interesting. Actually, there's one other movie, I can't think of the name of it. I'm not sure it couldn't have been The Vanishing, because I had to bring scorpions to Canada. I mean, sometimes in those days, you could put bugs in your suitcase and be fine and walk on.
Yeah.
But not today.
No.
Today's world. And I got permits to bring scorpions up to British Columbia for this movie. I can't remember the name of it. And I had all the paperwork. I said, here are scorpions. They're live scorpions. I'm bringing them in for a movie. And the female inspector just freaked out. And so we had to work it through so I could bring them in. But in The Vanishing, I had to bring spiders to Washington. We shot in Washington. And there's a scene where he opens up the ice chest and there are a bunch of spiders in there. And you'll help me out with names, because he was very famous actor.
Jeff, his name. I'm looking it up. I'm cheating. I'm not going to lie. Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges.
Yeah.
Very nice man. So, when I work with these, I have to tell them, one, are they dangerous? And I'll have a Spider-Man story about that. Are they dangerous? Are they, what do I need to do? What happens if a spider gets on me? So I have to go through all that stuff. So I had a really nice time with him. He was really nice. But I forgot the question you asked.
No, I was just talking about like from that point, because I think everybody I talk to, whether they're in the front of the camera or behind, there's like that turning point that it changes. And obviously Frank Marshall and Spielberg, which again, you worked with Spielberg again a couple of years later on Jurassic Park. It's just like good to have that. You have that moment, especially that movie. It's a movie about spiders, obviously a spider that's so tiny. can harm you in some, countries,
Yes.
some type of spiders.
So we had that conversation. I mean, there were numerous conversations because I got the original script. I mean, there were a number of versions. And some of the things I said in the meetings, like I said, I call myself a small game hunter. Well, they used that and they also, one of the nice things Frank did was he put me in as a cameo. So in the laboratory scene, when Julian Sands doesn't want to go to the town and wants to send his assistant,
Yeah.
and they find that he's playing football. Well, I'm in the background working on a microscope. So
That's
they
cool.
paid me $40 to do that. No speaking line. But because I'm knowledgeable, I'm educated, I know how to work with people, the level of fear goes down quickly, and I work with them so they're comfortable. And then they're not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
That happens over and over again. In Jurassic Park, they said they want a mosquito in amber. Well, mosquitoes are small, and I know that they could use a lens to magnify it. So my first job was, when I got that, was to find out what are the largest mosquitoes in the United States, and I found out there's one in Florida. So and they use that in the scene where you see a mosquito on the bark of a tree and it looks like sap, which was really honey coming down. And then it's too bad they don't show the whole thing because the mosquito tumbled in the honey. It was really great, but they don't show that. Then it cuts to animation. Then in the amber, mosquitoes are too small. So I used crane flies, which are about this big. And that is what is in amber. And in fact, I took that crane fly, when they don't feed as adults, and I took an insect pin and bent it, and that's the mouth part. And then I put on plastic wings so that the wings were larger. And then we embedded it in acrylic, colored acrylic, and that's what that amber mosquito is.
That's awesome. So it's so great. You're like, let me do this research. And then you have to go to whoever and say, okay, well, I need a flight to Florida in order to get this mosquito. That's the largest one. That's great.
Well, I have connections because I'm an entomologist. I can call up different experts.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and so sometimes I get things that I need because they know that I'm going to do it without harming the environment or anything, and they know that I know how to handle it and I know how to talk about it. That's why I could have gotten fleas for Teen Wolf 2.
Teen Wolf 2, yeah.
I could have gotten real fleas, but I didn't want to release fleas on a set. So that's when I came up with the idea of using forward flies, little flies that hop around and look like fleas.
That's great. And then while we're going back a little bit, so when I interviewed Brian Thompson, who worked with you in Fright Night 2, he was talking about how many bug people would work on a movie. It would just have been you, right? Or do you have assistants on movies?
I've had 3 assistants in my career. My first assistant, Michelle, we would just talk about and she was like an assistant teacher, and so she really didn't have any background in bugs, but she loved them and she could work with them. And so when I met her on a set of a movie, I realized I could use some help, and we worked together for lots of years, traveling around the United States, and it was just like heaven because they'd have limos pick us up, and we were paid good salary, and I got to go out and collect bugs and speak to other. So for me, we'd talk about that, and then the industry just died at some point. I forget when that was, and eventually I started getting more calls, and I knew a woman who was planning to go on and get higher degrees in entomology, Kat Halsey, and Kat and I worked for a brief period of time. And then around the time of Ant-Man, then Diana Taranova, who is all over the internet and works as an actress.
Oh, wow.
She was filming this movie. She was making her own movie, which she never released. And there were going to be a lot of sexy ladies in this movie. And so I really didn't want to do it, but I thought, well, it might be an interesting experience. So I worked with her. And then she realized what I did and how many movies I'd worked on. So she really wanted to learn about insects. So she started being my assistant. And now I turn a lot of stuff over to her. And she knows how to do a lot of things. So, and then she learned a lot from me. And one of the things she learned was, if you're going on a set with a tarantula, people will be frightened at first. And I become a babe magnet when I come on the set, because I'll come on, and people at first will stay away. They know there's bugs at the table. And within 15 minutes, I have women coming over. Just
I bet.
Women come over. So I taught her this. I said, at the end of the commercial or something, you're working, yeah, you can tell them they can have their picture taken with a tarantula. So they'll line up. I mean, it happens all the time. They want to have their picture taken with a tarantula on their shoulder. So that's something we just, that I taught her how to do.
That's great. No, so Brian Thompson said that the Bug guy, which would have been you, did you drive a Volkswagen Bug?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I had a Volkswagen Bug with mating milkweed bugs painted on the back, because that's what I did my master's on, was milkweed bugs. So I decided to do that. And I did that job by myself, which was difficult because in the scene, Dracula's assistant eats bugs. And they had a beautiful mannequin that looked just like him with a rubber stomach. And they had, I think, 4 or 5 guys controlling that mannequin, because he collapses and his stomach opens up and thousands of bugs. We did this live. And I told the director, you have 5 minutes, no more, 5 minutes, because all those bugs in the tube create heat and it could kill the bugs. And I had a plunger. So the first time we did it, the stomach just went out like a pregnant woman's stomach, and it went like that, and they didn't come out. So we had to reset. We reset because there were the guys doing the puppeting and me, and we're down below. I filled up this tube with bugs second time, and it just poured out. And they played the sound, and I think that's one of the best scenes I've ever done.
Oh, it's great. It's so cool. Brian did say, like, before they did that, because they were showing him with bugs on him for a little bit, and then they did the cut to like the puppet, the mannequin of him. But he was like, yeah, it was a long day for me.
Yeah. So that was fun for me. Prince of Darkness, when I worked with John Carpenter.
Oh yeah.
3 people I've worked with who've played piano on set: Stevie Wonder, John Carpenter, and who played Dracula's assistant in Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola. He's a singer.
Keanu Reeves?
No. A lot of people I just automatically know who he was. I'm just blocking on his name. Who's a wonderful person. He and Francis.
Oh,
Ford,
Gary Oldman?
No.
Winona Ryder, Anthony Hopkins.
No. But I did work. Anthony Hopkins was on the set, and we had a nice conversation. I'll think of it and I'll let you know. But he eats a bug, and he wears really thick glasses. Tom Waits Tom Waits.
yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So Tom Waits played the piano on the set. So those three, it's kind of interesting. You're there making this movie. There's a piano, and between takes they'll play the piano.
I don't know if you were aware of this, but I don't know if how you got the job for Friday Night Part 2 or which one filmed first between that and I guess Prince of Darkness was the year before, but they're good buddies. They were all in a band together. Tommy Lee Wallace, the director of Friday Night Part 2, and John Carpenter, and then Nick Castle, who directed a bunch of stuff. They all started on Halloween. They were in a band, and then they did the Halloween movie, and then they all did their own Hollywood journey, but they're all bandmates.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Boy, you're like
Tommy. Yeah,
you're like encyclopedic.
I have a good memory, but no, I love Friday Night Part 2. There's a great documentary on Friday Night and Friday Night Part 2 because Part 2, it got kind of shelved. It got a bad release, so not a lot of people.
I thought it was a good movie.
I love that movie. Yeah, it's a great movie.
And also, I'll bring up his name. Who played the detective in Fright Night Part 2? The TV show.
One of my favorites. He plays Peter Vincent. I can't think of his name.
Yes.
Roddy McDowell. Roddy McDowell. Yeah.
So I've worked with Roddy McDowell a few times, and I didn't interact with him on that movie. But he was later in a movie called We Shot Up in San Francisco, where I had to fly a wasp into his mouth. And that was really an interesting experience. And when you work with professional actors, they get paid good money. They could say, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
But the scariest part about that was I put a toothpick in his mouth and ran monofilament in, and as he's talking, the wasp flew in his mouth. I had to cut the stinger first so that he wouldn't sting. And before I did that, and I didn't know this would work or not, I had to try it out myself. Because I never will do anything on an actor unless I do it on myself first.
That's great.
So I don't know if you know what it's like being stung on your tongue with a wasp.
No.
Probably most people would say, not today. And so you don't necessarily have to be stung. If venom comes out and hits your tongue, it's just like being stung. So I clipped the stinger so it was shortened, so it still was in there, but it works like this. So the stinger comes out this far, but if you clip it right here, it goes like this and you don't get stung. So I rinsed it off. I put it in my mouth. The wasp just kind of walked around my tongue. I said, okay, I can do this. And then we did it with Roddy McDowell. That was a little adventurous.
Oh man. So it's so crazy just what goes into these scenes. Well, it's like so many parts of movie making. It doesn't take obviously 90 minutes to make a movie. It takes it could take 90 minutes just to get set up for like something like what you did. So that's insane. Do you work with the same bugs? Like the bugs that are behind you, that's for research now. But like when you were doing a movie, like if you had did you have like a go-to tarantula that you'd use for years?
Oh yeah. Well, there are different tarantulas. They have different behaviors. So you have to learn them.
Okay.
I can take one out later if you want, but I wanted to say the wasp, the same kind of wasp that I flew into Roddy McDowell's mouth, I used in the music video for Michael Jackson called Midnight in Moscow. Midnight in Moscow is on YouTube, and you can, it's in black and white, and it was shot in slow-mo. So the wasp is barely flapping its wings. And I put it on a monofilament. They had a high-speed camera, and then I just moved it through with its wings flapping through the camera. But it's a great shot. It's a good music video.
That's awesome. Oh man, no, because I wonder, because you have to, like you said, like they all have different behaviors, so you have to see what the director wants or what the script's called for in order to choose the the right species.
Not only the right species, you could have 1,000 ants or spiders. In Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man, Michelle worked with me on that one, and she had a number of painted spiders. So I had her test. In fact, I have one of the original brushes from Spider-Man, and I had two brushes I used. One had red on it, and the other one had blue on it. And so what I would do is have the spider walk across to the end, and then I would tap it like this, and the spider would web down. And I was up on a 6-foot ladder. Well, Michelle would pick out the spider to make sure it was webbing down, because some spiders won't web down. So you don't want to spend production time going through, oh, that one doesn't work, so now let me pick another one. So she's doing that job. She's picking out the spiders that will work. She hands me the spider. I put it on the brush. I get in position. Tobey Maguire's down. I aim for his hand. That was difficult because I had to make the spider land right on his, just in the right spot. And I'm up on a 6-foot ladder higher so you don't see me, and the spider comes down. And then they shot a second part where the camera was looking up, and I did the same thing so you could see the spider coming towards the camera.
Oh man, that's got to be some pressure too, trying to when you have somebody else that you're, or something like the spider that you're training, to try to get it as quick as possible, but that's got to be so difficult.
Well, you're paying, you're on a sound stage with all these people they're paying. So I try to keep production time. I don't want to do 100 takes.
Yeah.
No, I try to keep it really tight, and I do all my planning first. I learned that from Roger Corman.
You worked with Roger Corman?
I didn't work with him, but I worked at the studios with his people.
Okay.
And he said, how can you make a feature film in 5 days? And he said, we do all our planning ahead of time, and we don't do 15 takes. They do 1 take and they move on.
That's how Clint Eastwood works. I helped an actor write his memoirs, and that's what Clint did. If Clint liked his take and he thought the actors that were in the scene were good enough, even when he wasn't directing, like on Escape from Alcatraz, he'd be like, okay, we're good, move on. Like he would call that.
I've missed my chance with, he was high on my list to meet, because I wanted to tell him on The Exorcist II, when I was working, I heard Richard Burton being interviewed about Clint Eastwood. And Richard Burton said, oh, what a great actor. And I didn't know who Clint Eastwood really was. So I wanted to tell Clint Eastwood that story of how that was the first time I heard it. And Josie Wales, I think he's done some great, great movies.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with him politically, but as a movie maker, in music, I'd really like to meet him.
Yeah, no, totally. And then, no, I love that you mentioned the Roger Corman, because I've interviewed a few people that like came from his teachings, like this guy, Jim Wynorski. Another guy shoots movies in like a week. Same thing. Would they do 1 take, 2 take tops? And you could tell when you watch it, but who cares? That's not why you're watching a Roger Corman made movie. You're watching it for whether it's like one of those science fiction ones he did in the early days, or like those silly comedies that he would do too.
Well, I wish I could think of the name of the movie that I know I did Barbarian Queen 2, but it isn't that movie. It's another movie. It's outer space, and they had this woman, very well endowed woman, scantily clad. She hardly had anything on. And the director said, I want you to have a tarantula crawl from her ankle up to her chest. Then she's going to take the evil Bible and she's going to smash the spider. And then, and I'll tell you what happened at the end. So he said, how are you going to make the spider crawl from her ankle to her chest? And she was very well endowed. I said, oh, it's easy because spiders like to walk uphill. And we did it in one take. Walked up her ankle, up her thigh, across her stomach, up to her chest. And then she takes it in, and of course we remove the live spider, and they put in a spider that oozed material like soap and had blinking lights. And so her line is she smashes the spider and she says, damn, I hate robot spiders. That's the line.
That's amazing.
And although she was beautiful, her acting was not particularly good. But the fact that I did the spider scene, and I have a picture of her with her on my wall. I have a wall of celebrities, lots of people.
Cool.
Robin Williams, I worked with in the movie Jack. And
oh yeah, Jack. That's who directed that one. That was another
Francis Coppola.
Oh yeah, that was one of his. Was that his last movie?
No, that was an early movie. We shot that in San Francisco. I'll get back to that. But when I was 15 years old, you're talking to one of the few people who walked away from having their picture taken with Marilyn Monroe. And that was in Reno when they were shooting The Misfits. We were on a family vacation. I was an immature 15-year-old, and my father and I didn't get along. My father set up to have a picture taken. My sister's 4 years younger with Arthur Miller. So that picture was taken. And then I was supposed to have my picture taken with Marilyn Monroe. Well, because my father set it up, I walked on it. What a mistake.
What a mistake.
That's one of the two mistakes I made in my life. I'll get back to that, but I'll tell you the other mistake. When the Beatles, I was ushering at the Hollywood Bowl, the first time the Beatles came to the US, I said, it's going to be too noisy. I'm not going to go. It's a second mistake. But getting back to Marilyn, I vowed then, when I started working in the movie business, that I would not walk away, and I would try to get as many celebrity pictures with celebrities I have. So I have a wall of celebrities with lots of people: Sigourney Weaver, Denzel Washington, lots of Steve Irwin, lots of people on that wall. And that's to remind me never to do that again.
Yeah. And you can tell that story, and then they'll be like, okay, yeah, let's take this photo now. So you don't have to have that moment. So with those spiders and everything and the insects behind you, do you give them like each day? Do you take them out, or how does it?
I have to feed them. My insect zoo is rather small now. Like I have 10 tarantulas. That's generally small.
Yeah.
Because I have to, even though they don't have to be fed every day, it takes time. And I also paint with insects. So I want to spend time with my art. I also write. I want to spend time with that. I do science. I want to spend time with that. And then there's all the practical stuff you have to do.
Of course.
So I don't want, so Diana has a lot of things. Right now I'm raising monarch caterpillars and butterflies. And I'm doing some experiments. Like one of the experiments I'm doing is if you ask somebody, what does a caterpillar eat? They'll say leaves and say, yes, they do, but you realize they're also eating insects, which makes them an omnivore. So they'll eat eggs and insects that don't move. And so I'm documenting that. That's one of the things I'm working on.
Oh, wow. That's pretty neat. That's really cool that you do that. You do that right near, you have like a lab in your house, or?
I have a butterfly garden around my house.
Oh,
so
cool.
Outside my house, I can do that. Yeah, I love nature. I go hiking in nature, and I live a half a mile from the mountains. So I can do that.
Yeah, we're out in like West Jersey. It's like totally different from where I grew up. Like, just Jersey's not that really, it's not a big state, but in central Jersey, it wasn't as much like birds and insects and everything. My daughter, she's 3.5, and we have that app, that Seek app on your phone. I think it's iNaturalist makes it, but she loves it because we use it to identify like plants and everything. But she loves finding out what bugs are. So there's a bug, I put it in the app and it tells you what it is.
Yeah, at that age, children, if you think about it, children are smaller than adults, closer to the ground, so they're closer to see. And adults are way up here. So children are down in the ground and they find crawly things. They're curious. Do you have fireflies where you are?
Oh yeah, she loves them.
Yeah. So most people, like in the West, they don't see them. They don't know. They're magical. And that's what, like I said, that's what really started me.
Wait, where are fireflies only like an East Coast thing?
They get to the South and the Midwest, but they're not on the West Coast. We have other things like glowworms and stuff, but people don't see them. It isn't like you're driving around. And I've heard that the populations are really diminishing. They're going down, not as many.
So if you were in a movie, and if you were working on a movie that was like in the Pacific Northwest, and they were like, we really want fireflies in a scene, would you be like, well, this movie's set in the Pacific Northwest, fireflies aren't going to ever be here?
Right. I have that problem with scorpions. They want to shoot a scene. Well, where in the world are you shooting it, and where are you shooting it? So
Yeah.
that makes a difference sometimes. And that's where I use my entomology knowledge, and I can say, and sometimes they'll say, is this bug found in North Africa? Is this bug found in South America? And of course, most people don't know. They wouldn't know. But I have access to that world, and I can find out.
Yeah.
So
I would love to see one of those spiders. Now that you mentioned it before, now I can't get that out of my head. And do you still have any of your bugs are my business hats?
Oh, yes, I do.
That's awesome.
Let's see if there's one close by. Let me go look for that.
Okay. I can wait here. No rush.
I know they're floating around. I'd have to dig it out.
Oh, you don't have to. I just thought that was
But
so cool when I thought about
the
that.
hat from Spiderman.
Nice.
I mean, not Spiderman, Arachnophobia.
Oh, nice. That's cool that you had the wherewithal. I wanted to mention that before, like to work on your first movie and remember, because sometimes when you're in the moment of things, you're like, so like, oh, this is so cool. I guess maybe because you were there for 6 months. So you could keep like the plastic grasshoppers that you had. But I talked to a lot of actors and I always ask them about like memorabilia. And you've shown like so many things that you still have. There's so many actors that like really, they get like sort of bummed out. They're like, I never really thought about it like on my first movie. And then I finally started thinking about doing it. So it's cool that you did that from your first.
Well, you just made me. I have about 60 bug shirts. So I have a lot of
Nice.
insect shirts, but you just made me think of something. I have a really rare shirt. I want to go get it.
Okay.
I'll get one of my spiders.
Yeah, I guess Zoom took away the 40-minute limit, so we're good.
Well, I think when you speak with one person
But for a little bit, they changed that because they did it for like a month. But I think people complain because I was in the middle of I interviewed somebody like 2 weeks before I was interviewing Stuart Pankin and Peter Jason like back to back. And I read online, it was like, oh, they got rid of the 40-minute limit. And I was like, oh, I just did one 2 weeks ago. And then in the interview, it said you had 10 minutes left. So while he was talking, because I didn't want to be rude and be like, hey, I gotta like do that. So I entered my credit card. Like I had to do it really like without him noticing. Luckily, a lot of things are already filled in because I used to have an account. So I'm just like clicking. But no, I'm glad that it's working now.
Let me get this shirt. This is
all right, cool.
Okay, I'm coming.
I'm excited.
So now you're going to see a little bit of memorabilia, and then we'll do the spider. So in Arachnophobia, Frank Marshall had this tie made for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
So
what a good guy.
So he gave that to me. That was really cool. It's a silk tie. Then in movies, when you work on a movie for a period of time, they usually have jackets or t-shirts or hats. So this is really a cool jacket from Prince of Darkness.
Oh my God, you're gonna love this. So Peter Jason, who was in Prince of, I love that. He had that same jacket. He was at somewhere and there was a tennis player there that loved his jacket and he gave it to him. He gave him the jacket.
Wow. And then this is super rare.
God, I love that.
This is a t-shirt from The Exorcist II.
Whoa! How do you have that after all these years? That's amazing.
If you saw my house, you wouldn't ask that question.
Have you been in the same house for that long?
Oh no, I moved here in '94, but
okay.
I have the accumulation gene I got from my parents.
Oh, they kept everything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is one of my tarantulas, Rosie. And the tarantulas can live to be 30 years.
30 years?
Yeah, they can live a long time.
Wow.
And I used to be afraid of them. Now I love them. I've taught a lot of people to love them.
When were you afraid of them? Like as a kid?
Even into my late teens when I'd go hiking, because I always spent time in nature, and I'd see a tarantula walking on the road. I didn't know what to do with it. Now, now I handle them all the time. So I'll take Rosie out. What I'm going to do is when my hand goes in, I'm going to touch underneath her legs. That's how she smells. She smells with her feet. And then she knows I'm not food and I'm not going to hurt her. So I guess now she's touched with the bottom of my legs, and let's see if I can get her out of this container. So I'll put her on my shoulder. I don't know, because I can't see my view.
No, you're, I see it. Yeah.
So this is Rosie, and Rosie, to make her go, you push her back legs. To make her stop, you cover her eyes.
Oh my God.
And they're really great to work with. They're they only bite if for food, or if you try to pull off their leg or do something like that, squash them. But they're really quite benign, and like I say, they live a long time.
What does Rosie eat? What's Rosie's diet?
I feed Rosie. Right now, I have 3 different kinds of cockroaches. I keep in a collection, and she eats cockroaches. She'll eat crickets. She'll eat anything small.
Wow, that thing looks so cool. How much do they weigh?
They don't weigh that much, but enough so that
you feel it.
What's amazing is the reason they don't feel like they're that heavy is because their weight is spread out with 8 legs. See how she's lifting her legs up?
Hi, Rosie.
Yeah, she's waving. And then this is what people don't, they'll go, okay, so he has live spiders, and that's we would expect something like that. But what they don't think about is I have a whole collection of rubber insects. So I have all these rubber insects for stand-ins.
Yeah.
So when they're filming a scene, like I have a whole drawer of spiders
for lighting and everything.
Spiders,
yeah.
So that they match the spider. So when the spider, they're setting up the lights and everything, and I want my spider to do a certain action, and I know it generally works best the first time. So I don't want it just sitting there.
Yeah.
So I'll put a rubber spider there, or a rubber whatever. I had a friend do a job that I couldn't do, where they needed a scorpion to walk towards somebody. And that was another movie I did. I did Roadhouse 66, and I did another one in New Mexico where they actually used my foot because the scorpion. The movie is about this guy who tracks down this young couple. So the young couple is trying to escape him, and the guy keeps coming after him and coming after him. I don't know if that's enough information.
That's not the David Lynch movie you worked on, right?
No.
Oh, okay.
But David Lynch was just great, superb. So a little story about David Lynch. David Lynch is also, besides making movies, he's also an artist, and he's also composes music. And I worked on what's the movie? The name of the movie. The one.
The movie with him, The Lost Highway.
Lost Highway.
Yeah.
So in Lost Highway, I worked with him, and they had the screening. He used to. This is kind of an odd story. He used to have an assistant that would run errands for him. If he needed something, she would run errands for him. But she refused to drive on the freeway. So she'd have to come all the way from David Lynch's house to my house. And he was very interested. I don't even know what the project was, but he was very interested in flies. Well, I'm besides working as a professional, I've developed techniques for collecting flies. Like I collected 180,000 flies in my backyard one summer. I also have a fly-powered airplane. So David Lynch would sometimes purchase flies from me, dead flies. And we were going to the screening of Lost Highway, and I was dressed up, he was dressed up, and I told him that I would bring him flies. So I put the flies in like a little brown sandwich bag. And we meet at the screening. We didn't say anything. He just smiled, I handed him the bag. It was just one of those moments. How can you imagine that ever happening?
That's amazing.
And he also wanted to shoot when we did the moth scene. There's a moth flying around the light. He wanted the sound, and the sound guy was going to record it, but David said, no, I want to record it. So he and I went off in the corner and recorded that sound.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
So I was hoping I'd get to go to his house. I never did. I got to work with Marlon Brando on an Italian telecommunication commercial with butterflies towards the end of his life. That was just, he has such an aura around him.
Yeah. He was like he was the actor that really changed acting. Not saying nobody before that was there, obviously was a lot of great actors, but he like transitioned film. Like The Godfather kind of changed everything.
Yeah, well, this was unfortunate because he was really way overweight. And in fact, so much so, like I said, I like to have my picture taken. They were having a crew picture taken. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
His face was fabulous. And I got to work one-on-one with him with Butterfly, but he was too obese.
Yeah. So this has been great. One question I have to ask, because you mentioned the tarantula and the girl with the big hills. Was
Yeah.
there ever a time there was like very, I don't know how to ask, but like, was there like an odd thing that you were asked to do for a movie that was like really like difficult to do, that somebody tasked you with, hey, Steven, I need you to do blank. And you're like, I don't know if that could.
Well, there are a couple of things. One is
Okay.
working with American Humane, so you can't harm any insect you work with, a fly or a cockroach. Um, Even though if that fly, you can't harm it on set. If the fly flies over to craft service, you can swat it, no problem.
Uh,
So and fish and insects used to be exempt. So I don't approve of that situation. My approach is, if you ask me personally, anything that the average person would do, they should be able to do on film. So if you take a can of bug spray and spray a cockroach, you should be able to do that on film. However, if you people don't take butterflies and tear their wings off a live butterfly. So I don't think that should be done.
yeah.
So, but whatever people normally do, they should be able to do on film, but they go ballistic with that stuff. I've had a lot of challenges. I think the hardest one that I did, because I've done some things that were I think, pretty incredible. In Arachnophobia, they wanted a spider to crawl from 4 feet away into a slipper. I had no idea how to do that. If I said to you, I'm going to pay you a bunch of money, which they didn't, to figure that out, you wouldn't know how to do it.
No, wouldn't even know where to start.
So this is when I was doing research for the film. They gave me time to do research for the spiders. I figured out how to do it. Now you could put a quarter down anywhere on a floor, a flat floor. I could have a beetle or a cockroach or a spider from 4 feet away run over to that or get to that quarter. So you go, how do you do that? Because they can't see 4 feet away. They can't smell 4 feet away. So you say, I'll lay down a scent trail. Can't smell that. Although you could do that with a termite or an ant. So how do you get a spider to do that? So it's really problem solving. And this is one of the things that working in Hollywood and working as a scientist has helped me. How do you solve problems? So if you ask the same question over and over again, you get the same answer. But you have to learn to change the question. So I took it in steps. I said, how can I get the spider, just how to get the spider go from A to B? I said, if I had a wall, I can make a wall out of whatever you want to make it out of, so that it was slippery. The spider couldn't go left or right, and it would just have to go straight. but you're shooting this in front of a camera lens. So how can you hide a wall? And I thought about that. How do you make a wall disappear? Because I've changed the question, not how to get the spider there, but how do you make a wall disappear?
Yeah.
And who makes walls disappear? Magicians. How do magicians do it? They create an illusion. So I said, I'll create an illusion so you don't see it. So I said, and then I had some technical knowledge about how insects see, because insects don't see that well, but they do see light and dark. So they see movement, but they don't see images. So they couldn't read your T-shirt, but if you were moving your T-shirt, they could see that. So then I looked at my hand, I thought about how insects see, and I said, gee, if you look at your hand, you can see all your fingers. But if you just move it this slow, it will blur. So, put your hand in front of your face and move it this slowly. They're blurring. Your eyes can see it, but your brain can't make it. So I said, I'll take 2 tiny wires thinner than my hair, and I'll put them on little motors so they'll go up and down like this. And they're so small and it moves so fast, you can't see it. So I made this fence out of invisible wires, and that's how the spider went to the slipper.
Oh my God. I would say, like, obviously you've worked on a ton of things. I know I don't have your full list, but just from what you've done in Arachnophobia, because I think that movie, I don't know, just to see that many actual spiders in so many of the scenes. One scene, Peter Jason, he talked about like just seeing him in the bathroom, like the bathroom scene, when he, like, that to him was like so unbelievable to see that happen. They see the spiders just crawling up the walls.
Well, 2 things. One is, although my website, if you type in bugsaremybusiness.com in the URL, it will go to my website.
Cool.
You won't find it in a search engine. I have to get it up there again. So bugsaremybusiness.com, just the way it's spelled. And you can see a list of all the films, not all the films, but a lot of the films I worked on. I did so much. We even had at one point, because I was figuring out how to put the live spiders on the wall. So at one point we made metal walls and heated the walls to make the spiders move. We put Lemon Pledge, got notoriety because sprayed the walls with Lemon Pledge because the spiders couldn't hold on to the Lemon Pledge, so we could kind of corral them in certain areas.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that kind of research done. I had them tape up everything because the spiders live underneath bark. So if they got on the floor, we didn't want them to get under anything. And so it was, and there were assistants. I had 2 assistants to assist me and corralling and everything. So it was, and I made these catchers out of red plastic so that in the barn scene, when the spiders are coming out of the barn, we had these low plastic catchers that were red plastic, because when an insect goes up, they don't see red. So to them, it's black. So they'll go underneath red plastic and they'll stay there. So that's how we caught them.
Oh my God.
But we could go on, and I mean, there's so much. So one day maybe I'll write a book. I don't know.
Oh, you should, man. Steven, this has been great. I'm so happy the way that you found me, and that we could connect just from watching the scene in the movie, looking forward on YouTube, and somehow finding us, and then you finding the email that we had. But I'll make sure to put on on my website and in the little intro that I do, your website, so people can see all your credits and learn more about you. And I gotta get one of those Bugs Are My Business hats. I gotta find one.
I'll email you a picture of it. But I was going to say that I will check out. I mean, I just found you by happenstance because I was watching Teen Wolf 2, and then and of course I wanted to hear more about reviews you've done of other sequels, because there's a gold mine there. Of course, I want to ask you this question.
Yeah.
If you look at the original, how many originals compared to the sequels would you say the sequel is better than the original?
Oh, it's like very rare. There's like rare, very rare instances. And then you have people that say, like, oh, well, if it's already a planned sequel, like Empire Strikes Back over like a New Hope, but Aliens is definitely like depends on what you like, what a person likes, or Godfather 2 over Godfather. But there's a lot of movies that rival it that, like,
Yeah,
you
but
know,
in general, the first one is usually the best
for the
one.
most part. The only thing that I personally love about sequels, like the sequel formula has to be you can't do the first movie again, or there'll never be a third one. So something crazier has to happen, like in Jaws 2. Jaws is like one of the greatest movies ever. Jaws 2, they turn this shark, which sharks rarely eat people. I know right off of in Long Island right now, people are getting bit like
Right,
crazy
right.
over the last like few weeks, but rarely do they eat people. But in the second one, the shark is somehow related to the shark in the first one, as like stalking its victims, like it's a serial killer, like a Jason Voorhees. But no, they're fun. That's what I love about sequels, that there's a lot of them, and sometimes they get crazy when they try to bleed the bleed the well, I
Yeah,
guess, when they
yeah.
keep going and going with the same idea.
I just thought of another thing I did. I mean, we could talk forever because obviously, I love this and I have lots of stories, but but there's always this problem solving thing. So in Leprechaun,
Two.
it was two, um, they had cockroaches and they said, we're going to have some cockroaches. And I said, do you want them to be green? And they're actually green cockroaches, but we wouldn't be able to get them in the US. But I said, so I painted some cockroaches green. So in that's how it became green. And then I should tell this story about James and the Giant Peach. In James and the Giant Peach, they said, well, we have this spider and this little boy's going to pick up the spider. And I said, what kind of spider is it? And they showed me this picture, this animated spider that had a striped abdomen. And so I said, well, I can do that with a real spider. So through my research, I found a friend who had just discovered dwarf tarantulas, small ones. I knew they could make a plastic prosthesis with a little Velcro strap. So they painted one so it matched the animated spider. So that's where, my part of it wasn't scripted. That's where I add something to a movie that
Yeah.
wouldn't have existed.
No, because that's what it is as a movie watcher. If you watch a movie, like nurses and doctors, when they watch movies, I would say they would have to have like a heart attack because of some of the
Yeah,
phrases that they say. Or I'm
yeah.
sure there's movies you've watched and there is supposed to be some bug expert and they're talking about something. You're like, that's not right. So that happens all the
Well,
time.
where you saw a lot of that was in the 50s with all those atomic movies.
Yeah.
And you get the entomologist, the so-called entomologist or biologist, and you just want to go, this guy, where'd they get him out of a bar or something?
Did Julian Sands try to pick your brain at all? Because that's what his role was in the movie, right? In Arachnophobia.
What I did, my interactions with him, he was generally pretty quiet with me. John Goodman talked to me, and the other actors talked to me. Julian was kind of quiet and offset, but it was my job whenever there was anything entomological or arachnological, it was my job to tell them this is how they would do it. This is how
Okay.
they would do it. Like they don't know, because they're not trained in that. They'll say, okay, so this is what you would do. So you'd want to make sure you put the lid back on. You wouldn't just leave it off,
Yeah.
things like that. So
Man,
that
you're right, Steve. I could probably talk to you for hours. But here's one thing I have to say is you really need to write a book because you are the go-to. How many would you say when you were doing this in the 80s, 90s, 2000s? Like how many other like you were there?
well, what happened is it's a matter of there's nobody like me. There's
Well,
no
I know that.
entomologist.
I
There's
know
no.
that.
I mean, I'm just saying nobody has entomology background with
Yeah.
movie background, but there's always the low budget guy. So
Oh, of
that was the
course.
one that I always, you know, that was my competition, the low budget guy. So if he's a dog and cat or a reptile trainer, and I've gone in, and actually there have been times where they hired somebody, but they also hired me. I did a commercial once where the dog and cat trainers came in with butterflies, and they were the wrong butterflies. And I had the right butterfly, but they paid for both of us. I did a commercial. This was one where I made a lot of money because I had to make a snail walk in a straight line in front of a computer. Well, you go, wow, who could do that? Well, I figured out a way to do it. So, and it was a Super Bowl commercial, and I figured out how to make a snail go in a straight line. And that reminds me of another one I did where I did a commercial where they said, we're going to have ants running all over except for one ant that's going to run around the circle. And I figured out how to do that.
Wow.
So that's the part of the exciting part for me to work, is to solve these problems. Now they'd all CGI it, and it isn't as good.
Oh, I know. For all that, like special effects and stuff, like practical stuff is the way to go. That's why I love 80s, 90s movies the most.
Yeah. Well, I congratulate you on your work, and keep doing it. They'll keep making sequels. I hear they're going to be making a sequel for Arachnophobia. I'm not
really
sure. I'm not sure if it's in the works yet or not, but it'll probably, all the spiders will probably be animated.
I'm sure they better get Pankin and Peter Jason back in it, because they were able to.
The people on it were just great. Who played the lead in?
Jeff Daniels.
Jeff Daniels, really nice guy. And at one point, I was getting so much publicity. Jeff Daniels said to me, "You're getting more publicity than I am." So
yeah, if you go back into like the archives on the on my website, because it's easier, just like the sequelsonly.com, where you like email me, like that has it laid out so there's photos and it's easier to find people. But you'll see a lot of familiar faces that I'm sure you've worked with. Or
yeah, but I there are some people who won't interview and won't do this, but I'm sure all the people you did, great stories. It's just a great thing. I think I applaud you again.
Thank you
for doing it, and thank you for the interview.
Thank you, man. Yeah, this will be out in a few months. I think we're gonna do it. Just sometimes I never decide unless it's an actor or somebody that only worked on a few films. Then it's like I can only choose the sequel that they worked on. But I think just because like Exorcist II is such a touchstone for your career, I think like if you look at your career, just for me, from talking to you for 90 some odd minutes, like it's like obviously Exorcist II is the beginning, the one that gave you like this idea, like, oh, I could do this. And then Arachnophobia is the one, obviously Fright Night 2 and all these other great moments along the way. But then Arachnophobia is like the one that like shot you forward. But Exorcist II, that'd be fun because I haven't seen that in a long time. And the cast is great. So I think we're going to do that one.
Okay. Well, take care.
And have a great night, Stephen. Thank you so much. And I'll reach out before this comes out, and it'll sound amazing. And you can even like with your website, you can embed the interview on there if you want, but I'll
let me know all that stuff.
Thanks, man.
Okay.
Have a great night.